We were out at a restaurant bar. It's almost midnight at this point. My husband's phone starts ringing, and I watched the look of horror take over his face. And then he hung up the phone and he said, "That was the charge nurse at Chandler Regional. Alex's friends brought him in and he had no pulse." Nothing prepares you for that. The charge nurse came in and had just said he was brought in. After 16 minutes, they were able to resuscitate him, but we don't know how long he went without oxygen. The friends had said that they found him at a park. We would later find that was not truthful. He had aspirated a ton. They were suctioning his lungs, and I just remember walking in and just feeling completely heartbroken. I couldn't believe that's where we ended up. He was 17 at the time still. He was a couple months shy of his 18th birthday and just 2 weeks from his high school graduation. They told us that they needed to airlift him to Phoenix Children's Hospital because they couldn't treat him in the ICU at Chandler. And so fast forward, we're at Phoenix Children's Hospital waiting in the ICU. You know, at one point the doctor had come out and he had told us, "It's not looking good. You know, we're going to run tests throughout the day, but it's really not looking good." So we're just like just broken. It's like 5 a.m. at this point. We've been up all night, we're exhausted. And all of a sudden my husband says to me, "Oh my God, look up at the window." And I look up, and across the window it says #LookForTheRainbow. And in that moment, it was like this sense of peace washed over me. It was almost like a hug and a little bit of light in what was a very dark moment and day. A little bit later in the afternoon, the doctors comes in, the neurologist, and they say there's just no brain activity. That was the moment that we had decided, okay, we're gonna have to pull the plug. I just stood next to him and just said, "I'm so sorry, buddy." It was Mother's Day, and I couldn't believe that he was leaving the world on a day that so painfully mirrored some of his struggles.
Lindsay Taylor, welcome to the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I want you to share with the audience the very traumatic experience that you went through on May 9th of 2021 and anything that would be relevant to understand maybe leading up to that time to kind of help set the story up.
Yeah, so it all began about a couple weeks before that, mid-April 2021. It was an ordinary day at the gym. I was training with my coach, and he had randomly, and this is the least suspecting person to do this, but he had randomly brought up a conversation regarding spirituality and religion. And he was asking me what I believed. And again, if you knew this guy, I don't think we've ever had a conversation ever again since like it. But so I just started telling him that I grew up in the church. I had veered away from the church in my later teen years just because I felt like God was so much bigger than any one religion. That was kind of where my beliefs had veered towards. And so I was just telling him that I was more spiritual, not really involved in religion anymore. And I wasn't really searching or seeking. So I thought it was totally random, like why he would bring that up and talk about that. And so he ended up telling me about an alpha group that he had just joined. An alpha group is for people newer to Christianity, exploring the religion, questioning maybe they are more on a spiritual path, but they want to know Jesus more or know scripture more. And so alpha is just for people exploring, questioning, atheist, agnostic, that sort of thing. And so he rather adamantly started encouraging me to join this group. And I was pretty reluctant. Like I was telling him, I think I'm good. Don't really think I need this. I was kind of confused, like why we were having this conversation. But he kept at it. He kept pushing me. And so finally, I don't know, in the pushing me, I all of a sudden felt this nudge. And whenever I feel a nudge, I listen to that. And so I said, okay, I'll go. I'll try it. So went with them the following Tuesday. I'll get back to that and why that's significant. But that group would become everything I didn't know I would need. So fast forward to April 29th, 2021. I worked at a high school at the time. I'm a social worker. So I was supporting the social, emotional, mental health needs of students. And I had an intern, and she came in that morning and she starts to tell me about this experience she had with a psychic medium. And she was so moved by the experience. And so she's telling me about this. And she goes, Lindsay, you really need to go see this person. And the reason she was encouraging me to see the psychic medium was because I had lost a friend to suicide 3 years prior to this. And there was a lot of unanswered questions around that. And so she knew that. And so she was like, I really think you need to go see this guy. And I did not know how. I was, again, kind of like with the alpha group, I was reluctant. I wasn't sure how I felt about psychic mediums. I just wasn't sure. And so at first, as she's telling me, I'm kind of thinking same thing as I did with the alpha group. No, I'm good. And then as she kept sharing, again, I felt that nudge. And so all of a sudden, like it was like a light switch that flipped. I said, I'm going to text him right here, right now. And I felt the nudge to do it. And so I texted him, set up an appointment for the following Wednesday. So dates are really important here. So that would be May 5th, 2021. The guy didn't ask me anything but my name and my email. It was going to be over Zoom. And so it was a very easy set up the appointment, and that was done. So now a few days later, we're Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. I'm driving down the road and my boss is calling from the school. And that's very unusual on a Sunday. And so I got this sinking feeling in my gut. I had been working with a student at the time who had been significantly struggling with thoughts of suicide. In fact, he had had 3 previous attempts. And I'll never forget his last attempt in February. He had come to school the next day and shared something that he had journaled with me. And it was the first time that I really caught a glimpse into the suicidal mind. And I just felt the weight of his world on my shoulders. And I just sat there and I read and I looked at him and I said, I'm going to need to process this a little bit. I needed to even process what I was reading. It was that deep. And I secured safety in the moment. I said, are you in imminent danger? And he's like, no, I was just processing my feelings. He had just got out of the hospital. So I said, okay, let's meet again tomorrow. I want to sit with this. And so I remember going home that night and just bawling because, again, felt like I had the weight of his world on my shoulders, didn't know how to help with, there was only so much I could do in a school setting. We're not clinical. We're not doing clinical work. So there was only so much I could do to support him with my role at the time. So anyway, I would go back and we would have a really good conversation, and I just did the best I could to support him the following months. And he ended up doing better the next couple months. So anyway, Sunday, my boss is calling and I have this sinking feeling. And I answer and she says, Lindsay, are you by yourself? And I said, yeah. And she goes, are you somewhere you can talk? And I said, yeah. And she said, I just want to let you know. And she said his name. It died by suicide, or he's in the hospital, but it's not looking good. And that was absolutely the hardest week to date in my career. All those emotions came flooding back. I'm just so sad that I couldn't help him see the miracle that he was. And so that week would be it really rocked our whole community. It was very devastating, obviously. And so I was on, the crisis team, obviously, and then dealing with my own grief, helping students through theirs. His family, there was just so much going on that week. And pretty soon after I got that news, I thought about the appointment that I was about to have on Wednesday, May 5th, with a psychic medium. And I thought, what are the odds that I'm going to go see a medium and I just experienced this loss? I didn't know if there was anything significant there, but it was just, it had just crossed my mind that the timing was interesting. So I almost canceled the appointment. The week was so overwhelming. There was so much going on, but something in me said to keep it. So that Wednesday, May 5th, I meet with this guy. And he said so many mind-blowing things that it was just unbelievable. But a couple things that he said that are going to be important as I head into this next part of my story. At first he said to me, what's the deal with the rainbow? And I said, I don't know. And he goes, what does a rainbow mean to you? And I said, hope. That was the first thing that came to my mind. And he said, okay, there's something really strong with a rainbow. You need to pay attention to that. So I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he said, they're saying it comes in threes. And at this point, he had already called out my student that died by suicide. He had called out my friend that died by suicide. And when he said that, I instantly got this like sinking feeling in my gut that he was talking about my son, just knowing the situation we were in at the time with him. And so that was like very unsettling. And then he said, are you going to specialize in suicide? And I said, I have no idea. Like I was obviously working with students who were struggling with this sort of thing, but I didn't even know that was a specialty. I didn't even know you could specialize in that. And so I said that to him. I said, well, I'm working with kids who are suicidal, but I have no idea. I didn't know what that meant either. And so anyway, fast forward to the end of the conversation. Again, so many things that he said was just, and in hindsight would be very symbolic or significant. But at the end of the conversation, he brought up the rainbow again. He said, there is something really strong with a rainbow. You need to pay attention to that. Okay, so fast forward. Now we're Saturday, May 8th. And my student's memorial was that night. So I attended, again, tons of people there from our community. And I remember my boss lived right near the memorial, actually. And so on the way back to her house, she said, Lindsay, I want you to just completely unplug tomorrow. The next day was Mother's Day. She's like, I know this week has been a lot for you. She said, just go home, enjoy your family. Don't think about work tomorrow. And so I left that night truly just ready to like let the weight of that week and the heaviness and the grief that I was experiencing, I just was like ready to set it down and to enjoy time with my family, because the reality of the fragility of life was closing in on me, right? And so my sister was in town because it was Mother's Day weekend. So we actually, my husband, I, and her boyfriend at the time, we went to dinner that night, and then we went out to Old Town Scottsdale. So we were just having a nice evening, letting down from the hard week. And we were out at a restaurant bar, and it's about midnight. It's almost midnight at this point. And my husband's phone starts ringing. And it was a Phoenix number we didn't have on the phone, but the timing felt odd. And so we both kind of exchanged a quick look, and then unspoken, yeah, you should answer it. And so my husband picks up the phone, and I watch the look of horror take over his face. And at first, my initial thought when he first answered the phone, my initial thought was maybe Alex had been, like it was the police calling, because I knew some of the decisions that he was making at the time. And so that was my very initial thought. But when I saw that look on my husband's face, I instantly knew. And so I froze. I went into complete shock. My husband darted out of the restaurant, and I'm sitting there just totally in shock. And my sister's across the table, and her thought was exactly what my first thought was. She said, do you think Alex is in jail? And I looked at her and I said, I think he's dead. And she goes, well, aren't you going to go help Matt? And all of a sudden it kicked in, the adrenaline kicked in, and I was able to get up, and I ran out of the restaurant to find him in the rocks. And I just started saying, is he dead? Is he dead? And he signaled for me to wait for a minute because he was still on the phone. And then he hung up the phone, and he said that was the charge nurse at Chandler Regional. Alex's friends brought him in, and he had no pulse. He said they were able to resuscitate him, but they don't know how long he went without oxygen. And so he was on a ventilator, and it was really serious, and we needed to get there right away. And so I instantly went into like, okay, I need to take over here, because my husband was incredibly distraught. At one point, he started walking off. He was so angry. And so we're kind of parked far from our car. So I start gathering our stuff. And at this point, some people can tell that we're in crisis. And this bicycle guy says, do you guys need a ride to your car? And I said, yes, please. And so I get my husband, my sister, and her boyfriend had settled the bill. They had come out at this point. And so we all get on this taxi bike and he drives us to our car. And on the way to the hospital, my husband is just, he's completely distraught. And, you don't realize when you go through an experience like that, you don't realize how many emotions you can have all at once. Like I felt sadness, anger, hurt, shock, even a faint bit of hope. I experienced just the array of emotions like all at once. And my husband was really angry, was like the main emotion that was coming out. And so I'm just trying to keep him calm. And he's, he's saying, I think he's dead. And I, that hopeful piece of me was like, let's just wait till we get to the hospital and let's just see. So we pull up and, Alex's friends were outside and that's a whole nother part of the story. But I couldn't imagine what they were facing in that moment either. And so these are friends that, he had not been making good decisions with, and I didn't really know. But I just remember walking up to them first before we even walked into the hospital and just giving them a hug. I had no idea what happened, but I couldn't imagine, 17 years old processing what they had just witnessed. And so we end up getting into the hospital and they take us back to a room to talk with the charge nurse. And the charge nurse came in and had just said, he was brought in after 16 minutes. They were able to resuscitate him, but we don't know how long he went without oxygen. And so he basically just told us, that the friends had said that they found him at a park. We would later find that was not truthful, but he just kind of tells us what they had heard happened. And then he had prepped us for what we were about to walk into, what to expect. And I just remember his kindness in that situation, just, telling us, I'm so sorry, and asked us if we had any questions. And we asked a few questions, and then he walked us back to the room. Nothing prepares you for that. When we walked in, they were suctioning his lungs. He had aspirated a ton. And I just remember walking in and just feeling completely heartbroken. And I couldn't believe that's where we ended up. I couldn't believe it. Nobody ever expects to walk that road and to go through something like that, and for your kid to experience that. And so my mind was trying to make sense of how we got here. I just didn't understand how we got here. Everything had happened so fast, with him going downhill down this path. It happened so fast that my brain was just trying to process it. And I'm just looking at him, so broken in many ways, And so, I just stood next to him and just said, I'm so sorry, buddy. So, that moment was very hard. And, so they would end up, he was 17 at the time still. He was a couple months shy of his 18th birthday and just 2 weeks from his high school graduation. And, so they told us that they needed to airlift him to Phoenix Children's Hospital because they couldn't treat him in the ICU at Chandler. And so they ended up airlifting him, and me and my husband would, drive and meet them there. And so at this point, we're, fast forward, we're at Phoenix Children's Hospital waiting in the ICU room to get back to his room. And at one point the doctor had come out and he had told us, that they were trying to stabilize him. I mean, it was very touch and go the whole time. And, he really prepped us, like, it's not looking good. We're going to run tests throughout the day, but it's really not looking good. And so we're just like, I just broken. That's like at that moment during that time, that's just all I felt. And just really like over and over and over disbelief, like, how did we get here? How did we get here? And so we're laying in the ICU room. It's like 5 a.m. at this point. We've been up all night, we're exhausted. And all of a sudden my husband says to me, he says, "Oh my God, look up at the window." And the way he said it was like almost this eerie, like he was shocked. And so I don't know, it startled me a little bit, just the moment and everything that was happening. And so I kind of hesitated, and he's like, "Look up at the window." And I look up, and across the window it says #LookForTheRainbow in huge letters. And in that moment, it was like this sense of peace washed over me. It did not make sense for that moment to feel that, but it was almost like a hug. And that would be that, and a few other moments soon after that with the rainbow would become a really defining moment to me, that there's something far beyond our human comprehension to all our lives and stories. And that moment was the first moment of understanding that a little bit of light in what was a very dark moment and day. So we would end up getting back into his ICU room after that. And I don't know if you want me to walk you through that whole day.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Alex was the oldest of 4. And so he had 3 siblings. And we ended up, as the day went on, at one point we almost lost him. Even with the ventilator, he was really, really in critical condition. And so they end up telling us a little bit later in the afternoon, the doctors comes in, the neurologist, and they say there's just no brain activity. There's nothing happening. And so that was the moment that we had decided, okay, we're going to have to pull the plug. And so Alex was the oldest of 4, and his siblings, they just knew that he was in the hospital. They didn't know what happened. We asked my sister just to wait, obviously, till the day played out. And so he had a brother who was 14, and his sister who he was really close to. They were the closest, was 7 at the time. And then he had a 2-year-old sister. And so we had called my sister and said, please bring the kids. We decided to leave the 2-year-old home because she was so little, but we said bring Austin and Ari. And so my sister drove them down, and having to tell them that their brother was going to heaven was like the second hardest part of that day. I just remember my daughter, she's 7, like trying to make sense of it. Obviously, our older one like understood it better, but Ari, we tried to explain, what it was going to look like when she walked in, and we gave them the option. We gave them the choice. Like, if you want to go in and say bye. And she wanted to, but again, I don't think anything could really prepare you for what you're going to see when you walk in. And so they both ended up choosing to go in there. And when we walked in there, it ended up being really actually pretty traumatic for Ari. And so she wanted to leave pretty quickly, but they said their goodbyes, and then they left, and it was in that moment that my husband said, okay, it's time. And so he went and got the doctor, and we started prepping. And I just remember, this is an important part of the story. Alex is not mine biologically, but we raised him from the time he was really little. And so, but not having his biological mom in his life was like at the root of some of his struggles. And whenever I talk about Alex's mom in this story, I always want to honor her too and her pain, even though she wasn't there. But that was a really, really tough thing for him. And so I was, I had stepped into those shoes and raised him and did the best I could. And I talk in my book about this, but, there was a lot the last year of his life that Alex was working through. There was really a lot of the abandonment and struggles with his mom not being there had really surfaced. And so there was a lot of misguided anger that he was directing towards me, and then some of it absolutely justified. And so the last year of his life, we were really working through a lot. And so I just remember standing there. Matt's on the left side of him, I'm on the right side of him, and he's in the middle of us. And I just remember looking down at him and thinking it was Mother's Day. And I couldn't believe that he was leaving the world on a day that so painfully mirrored some of his struggles. And here it was, just Matt and I by his side, like it had been his whole life. So that's actually a moment I will hold near and dear to my heart. Is, when Matt and I got married, we did a rose ceremony where I gave the boys a yellow rose. I gave Matt a white rose and the boys a yellow rose, which symbolized my forever love and commitment to them. And so I just remember in that moment, and actually the year prior to this on our anniversary, when I gave Alex that yellow rose, I would say that was the last time that we really embraced and had like a very meaningful, exchange and hug, even though things were hard, like even though he was struggling greatly. And so I just remember in that moment, thinking like, I gave him that rose thinking that I would be loving him, unconditionally for the rest of my life. And here I was sitting next to him at the end of his life. But that was a very meaningful moment, just knowing like that it was Mother's Day and that he was passing on this day that really painfully mirrored some of his struggles. And so that really hit me in that moment. And the doctors would end up coming in and we would, they would start prepping. And I just remember, it was a pretty traumatic, honestly, that was a really traumatic moment. Something that we still really are working through. But my husband just put his hand on his heart and I held his hand, until his heart stopped. And it really was a moment, his heart struggled to stop because he was a competitive gymnast. He was an athlete. He was super strong. And so, yeah, that would be, that moment was something that will be forever etched in my mind.
Yeah. I think it's probably safe to say that every parent's greatest fear in their life is losing a child. I think about this probably more than most, just because of the nature of the podcast. Mm-hmm. And I think there's like this idea that I want to try to unpack with you, which is the balance between letting your kids make their own choices and their own decisions and live their own life. And then the extreme other end would be, controlling everything that they do and essentially locking them in a cage and being the helicopter parent, So you talked about, you started flipping through these stages of grief and you had these emotions come up, which were like, how did we get here? And I can imagine what's going through your mind at that time is you probably go into some deep introspective self-reflection on like, what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, obviously friends that your children make at a young age, probably in their early teens or preteens even, often dictate, in many cases, the outcomes of their lives, but specifically some of those more crucial years of development. And, Alex didn't make it to a place where he had great influence around him, right? So how do you, what's your, as you've worked through this, what's your guidance to parents that have young children in finding that balance and trying to set them up for a healthy, happy life?
Yeah. I was 18 when I started dating Matt and jumped into helping him raise the boys. So I always say Alex was my greatest teacher. I did my growing up with him. And so I think it is such a fine line. What I learned over the years is I just started to parent how I parented. That's what I did. I just adapted how my parents parented. And so my kids weren't listening. I yelled at them. And, I learned over the years, I always say, even being in the profession of social work and helping families, literally walking through a very similar thing that we were walking through. I wish I knew everything I know now, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Yeah. But unfortunately, it takes time and it takes maturing and it takes growing up. And with time and experience, we gain wisdom. And so there was a lot of things I just didn't know. And I think as parents, we are so quick I think parenting gives us this false sense of control. Like we can control our kids. We can control the outcome of their lives. We also, as parents, sometimes take on what our kids do and take it personal, like it's a reflection of us. Yeah. So I think there's many elements here, but what I learned was some of how I was handling things was not helpful. It was not helpful at all. And everything I did, every step of the way was always with the best of intentions. I always had his best interests at heart. I just wanted him to become a happy, healthy, functioning, human being, adult. And so, everything I did was always to the best of my ability, but I didn't always get it right. And I think as parents, being able to look our own selves in the mirror and say, what do I need to change? What do I need to do? I think that's key. And so there was a moment this summer before Alex passed away when things had been starting to get really rough with him, because the marker with Alex was March of 2020. So we always say it was right about when COVID hit. That's when he started getting really into using marijuana. And so I always say when I talk about this, we lost Alex to marijuana first. The fentanyl stopped his heart, but marijuana completely changed the person he was.
It's the gateway, yeah.
Yep. And it was so bad that he ended up, and I think a lot of parents don't even realize this, he had marijuana-induced psychosis. Like I hear parents sometimes, I've heard this, that like, I'd rather my kid smoke weed than drink. I mean, we could argue what's worse, but the reality is the marijuana these days is very potent, and it's not like what we had back in the day. And so anyway, that really changed Alex. And that was when things really started going downhill. And we watched him turn into a kid we didn't even recognize. He would end up quitting gymnastics. His life was definitely changing. And so that summer before, I just remember I had this moment where I was so physically ill from the choices he was making. Again, going back to as a parent and parents listening, like all we want is for our kids to turn out okay and to be happy and healthy. I mean, that is what we want as parents. And of course, that's exactly where I was at. And the path he was going down was completely destructive. And it was tearing me apart to watch him tear himself apart. And so I just remember in that moment, talking to a God I didn't even know at the time or hadn't talked to in a long time, a very distant God. And I just said, God, help. What do I do? And in that moment, I heard turn inward and surrender. And I sat with that for a minute, and I started to have this realization that I could not control Alex and the choices he was making. He was his own person. Our kids become their own people. Yes, when they're little, we have a little bit more, I guess, a false, we have a little more control over them. We think we have control, but we have a little bit more influence. But as they get older, they become their own people. And so I realized that the decisions he was making was beyond my control. And so what I did was I turned inward and looked at what was I doing that was not helpful. What could I change? What could I do? What could I control? How do I need to show up in the situation for him to be the best mother that he needed in this time in his life where he was really, really struggling? And so instead of the focus now being on him, the focus turned to me. Like, what do I do? And I realized too, and I preach this now to parents all the time when I help parents with this sort of stuff, I say, you have influence, you absolutely have influence, but you do not have control. And so what I did in that moment too is I started to focus on my influence meaning how I'm showing up, how I'm behaving, how I'm reacting. And so that changed everything. And I will say, I think that I was able to come to a very, a place inside of me of inner peace, even though the situation hadn't changed, even though Alex didn't make any changes, there was still, the situation around me was still chaos. I felt peace. And that was huge. And so I talk about that, when we love somebody who's struggling with that sort of thing, or even, if it goes on into their lives, we all know somebody who struggles with addiction. When we love people who struggle with addiction, the key is really setting boundaries, not enabling, but then looking at how do you need to show up in that situation, and just focusing on what you can control. That's the biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, St. Francis Assisi taught this principle of teach love and patience and kindness and long suffering and meekness and tenderness and a bunch of other sort of Christ-like attributes.
Yeah.
And when necessary, use words, right? And the idea is just setting the tone with your actions. I think it has much more of a profound and lasting impact on our children than we realize. We think that it's the things that we say that are going to influence them, and I think it's very little about what we say, and it's way more about what we do and how we show up.
Yes.
My own personal experience with my parents. I would say my father more so, but I didn't feel super safe sharing much with them about what I was going through, or different thoughts or emotions, or the first time that I was exposed to pornography or, alcohol or drugs or any of these things. And I constantly think about how do I not create that same fear, that same experience for my kids? Like, how do I create a place or a relationship with them where they feel totally comfortable and totally safe opening up about their deepest fears and struggles and trials, and maybe negative desires, right? What's your guidance for how to create that with a child?
Yeah, so that's why I say I wish I knew everything I know now, even 10 years ago. The boys, we had the two older boys. So Alex would be 21, his brother's 18 now, and then we've got 11 and 6. And so I always say my girls are getting a way different mom than the boys got, and it's just because they're getting a mom who's older, and, Alex was the teacher. And so anyway, but I got trained in a curriculum called Positive Discipline, because I also, in working at, which we haven't touched on this yet, but in working at the Suicide Treatment Center, I also saw a lot of the struggles between the parent-child dynamic and relationship, and I walked it personally. I get it. And so anyway, I got trained in this curriculum. And what I love about this curriculum is, first of all, it goes off of Adlerian psychology, which identifies the fact that at the root of all human behavior and all human needs is to belong and feel significant. We need to feel belonging and significance. And so belonging is that we need that love, that connection, and the significance to know that we are significant, we're living a meaningful life. Those are at the root of what all humans need. And so with this curriculum, though, it really walks you through like connection before correction. Like, you have to connect with your kids before you provide correction, because that connection is what's going to lead them back to you to feel comfortable with opening up about these things that might be hard. If your child doesn't feel like they're connecting with you, they're not going to feel safe opening up with you, right? Yeah. And so again, it's built on connection in this model, empowerment. It's an empowerment model. So we are so quick as parents. It's just this innate, as parents, we have these innate things that we just automatically do without even thinking about it. But we're so quick to tell kids what to do instead of having them come to the conclusion of what they think they might need to do in that situation, like having that introspection. So also a part of this model is asking what and how questions. So even when your kid does something wrong, it's not saying like, why did you do that? Yeah. It's like, hey, how did you get to that space? What do you think what do you think this made me feel in this situation? Instead of just telling your child too how it made you feel, like having them look at that and analyze that. And so in doing that, we're empowering our kids to come up with the answers, to find the answers within themselves, to be able to look outside. And we don't have to tell them everything. I think as parents, we're just so quick to tell them what to do. Yeah. So that's huge. So I've learned many, many things from this model. And one of the most things I love the most about this model is it's called the mistaken goals chart. And so it has you look at there's 4 common behaviors that we as all humans experience. But of course, this is geared towards parenting, but you can use this in any relationship. You can use this in a marriage with coworkers, but it has you look at the behavior, and then it identifies what is the belief behind the behavior and what is the coded message. And so when we start to understand too, like what is behind our children's behavior, or what are they really needing? That's when we get to the root of it. And that's when we open up that connection and create that safety, is when we're really able to see them and see underneath the behavior. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I coach a handful of CEOs, and human psychology would suggest that, using the word why, it has such a negative connotation of, my own coach actually used to say, if you use the language why, you might as well just put dumbass on the end of it. It's basically like you're saying, you're an idiot. Yeah. Why would you do this? Right. And so I work really hard, just not only professionally, but even in my own home, to use how and what as the kind of lead into questioning, which I love. Before we sort of get to the new and improved version of you from this experience, how did their siblings process this?
This is the other thing. Actually, I heard this from Heidi Powell. She said grief, and I don't know who she got this from, but grief is like a thumbprint. It's unique to every individual. And that really, really stuck with me, because I think too, I remember feeling very early on, like I remember judging myself for like how I was grieving. Like, am I grieving right? Am I doing this? It's so interesting that we do that, right? And then I had to like reel myself back in and be like, and when I heard that, and I'm like, yeah, it's there's no right or wrong way to grieve, right? And so I really was very intentional with my kids about allowing them to grieve in whatever way that was, and to not push anything, and so what I mean by this is his brother, who was 3-4 years younger than him, really didn't show much grief. And I remember at times thinking like, gosh, is this unhealthy? Is this going to come out in, ways that are unhealthy later on? But I just, again, realized that like he has his own way of processing this. And so for him, how he grieved was really taking on more of, honestly, I think that oldest child now role and protective role in the family. Like he really was very protective of my husband through that process. Him and my husband are really close. And there was definitely, and this is a very real part of grief. He was mad at his brother. And so I think for a while he was really just working through that. And so it wasn't so much the sadness, it was like the anger that he was working through. He was upset at, how that, watching his family grieve, too. So he really took on like a very more protective role in the family, and just, grieved and being like a helper, like being there for everybody. That was really how he showed up in his grief. And then my 7-year-old, like I said, her and Alex were 10 years apart. And I don't know if it's just that age difference, but it was like the perfect age gap where Alex was more like not only a cool big brother to her, but like almost a caretaker in a way. Like he really was very close to her. He took her to the skate park. He'd drive her to the gas station. Like they would just do fun things together. And so she was the one that really went through more of the grieving process naturally. I mean, when I say naturally, like really experienced all the range of emotions, sadness. And so we had to put her in therapy for a few years. We did EMDR therapy again to work through that day because it was very traumatic for all of us. So to help her kind of understand and reprocess in her brain that day. And so to this day, she's like such an old soul, such an intuitive little girl. Like she really connects with him in many ways. Like she has learned how to, I think she has that gift. She's very deeply connected with him. She has a little shrine in her room. She wears his shirts to bed. I mean, she's very connected. And so she's really, processed through her grief, and grief's a lifelong journey. So when I say process, I mean, it's something that we all daily, things will come up and so my point is she's dealing with it. She's processing it. She's going through it. But it's always there, and so, but she's done well ultimately considering, I mean, again, very close to him. And so that was hard for her. And then the 2-year-old, it's so interesting because, again, she was way too young to understand what was happening. But I think instantly, like I can remember getting home from the hospital and her behavior changing pretty quick. And I realized early on that she was picking up on like the emotions and what was going on in the house. And so she, a couple years later, as she got a little bit older, of course, we talk about him all the time. His pictures are all over. So she just knows him through that. She won't have actual memories, but it's wild how impacted she is too. Like she asked a lot of questions, was trying to make sense of it. And so, it's interesting to see even her longing for him and how it impacted her. So we've all gone through our process uniquely. But yeah, it was hard for sure, especially for the middle one, Ari. Yeah.
There's just a little side note for you. In a week and a few days, there's a interview going out, Mark Cram, who you mentioned before. Yeah. So I actually had him back on the show with his wife, Holly, and their interview's coming out in about 10 days from now. And they teach a course called How to Speak to God, but it's not what it sounds like. It's actually how to communicate with close loved ones who have passed. And they have a whole framework around this, and they do it on a daily basis, and it's pretty beautiful. And so, I would encourage you to dive into that. And I'm obviously going to make that intro, and so you can get to know them personally as well.
I love that. Ari, she's told me about some experiences that she's had with Alex, and I don't doubt any one of them, and I just really encourage her to continue to tap into that and to tune into that. So it's beautiful. It is.
So since this happened, you've obviously dedicated your life to, what I would say like healing and progression against trauma. And you spent a lot of time working with addicts and people with suicidal ideation. You're currently the director of a suicide treatment center.
Just left that job, but yes, I was the director. Yeah.
So you've gotten deep into that. You said something earlier that really piqued my attention, and I wanted to wait to ask until we got into this kind of section of our conversation. But you said that you for the first time got a glimpse into the suicidal mind when you were interviewing this or sitting down with this young man who took his life. What does a glimpse into the suicidal mind actually look like?
Ooh. I saw how much he wanted to be okay and how much he actually wanted to live. In what I was reading, there was so much wishing that he could feel differently, wishing that he could repair the things that he wanted to repair. So there was that. And then there was like the deep depths of despair. Like reading his words, I could feel into the hopelessness and the despair and honestly the darkness that he felt suffocated under. And gosh, it's so hard to describe, but it was like a feeling so deep in me where there was like a part of me. I don't know how, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Suicide, I believe, is 100% preventable. It's 100% preventable. And that's why I've dedicated, my life and my work to this, is to help people through this. And also, I could respect where he was at and honor the fact that he didn't want to live. So I wanted to do everything I could in my control to help him get out of this, because I do believe he could have 100% overcome this and worked through this. But I guess in reading his words and his writing, I also understood how heavy what he was carrying, how heavy it was, the things that he was carrying, how heavy it was. And I realized that I needed to also sit with him in that heaviness, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I asked because I started this brand called Levels a few years ago, and it's the nature of the brand is it's really the underpinnings of it. It's not the way that we talk about it to the world per se, or the way that we market it, because it's a little unpopular to say this, but the underpinnings are really that the suicide and depression and mental health crisis among men is higher than it's ever been in the history of the world, and it's getting worse. And I've had way too many men than I care to admit commit suicide over the last few years. And and we just lost another one. And this one hurts. This one hurts really bad because, I wouldn't consider him like a close friend, but he's my next door neighbor, and he has eight children, and our kids. Our kids are really close to them. And my wife and his wife are really close. And there's just so many emotions. And there's a side of me that just can't, it's almost that, there's like this weird anger inside that's like, man, how could you do that? But then there's immediately this other side that just feels so sad for that, the thing that we're talking about here, which is that he was able to get to that place, and what he must have been dealing with, and how he was suffering, and the demons he must have been fighting for a long time. But he did it quietly. And it's one of these men that, like, out of all the, it's a really tight community here. There's only 8 homes, and most of them are family. And out of all the men, he's certainly the one that shows up the happiest and the most joyful, and really pours into the kids. And so it's hard and it's confusing, and I feel for his kids. And so I was trying to think about how to share this with my kids. It's like, what, when you lose somebody that's close to you from suicide, how do you even talk about this? What do you say? And it's interesting. I prompted ChatGPT to help us think through this as a child therapist would think through this. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is it says to talk about mental illness like physical illness. Yeah. So frame the death within the context of an illness, just as a heart or lungs. Just as a heart or lungs can get sick, so can a person's thoughts or feelings. And yeah, I can't imagine what he must have been dealing with in those final moments,
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like when I read what I read, I can't imagine being in that place. And just as like with physical illness, right? Like if somebody dying of cancer who's in so much pain, just as nobody wants to live the rest of their life in that kind of pain, if it's a physical illness, nobody wants to live the rest of their life in that kind of mental pain.
Yeah.
And again, I want to make it so clear that like this is preventable, and it is. I have seen people recover, from these things, 100%. So there is light and there is hope, and that is what I want to spend my days bringing, to these dark places. And also, I think it's okay, like that we're sitting here right now and honoring the heavy and the hard, because I think that needs to be seen too, because I think that's actually what's going to break down walls. Because if people feel shame for being in that dark place, like this, like, he's a father of 8, he's got a whole family, like you said, like you said, I can't imagine doing that. But then in that same breath, gosh, what kind of pain was he in? Because nobody wants to leave their family like that. Yeah. And I think in order to reduce the shame with this, we have to honor like people that are in that space. It's not wrong. You're not wrong for being in that space. You're sick, you know? And, I don't know, hopefully it's okay that I'm sharing this. I'm very open. But, even my own husband, has said he's spent on and off, throughout his life having suicidal thoughts. And, it's interesting because it's interesting that this has, I always say like this work chose me. Like, I don't know, God has me on this path for a reason, but I personally have never struggled with that. So like as a personal battle, I haven't battled that. But man, it has been in my life, and I have been the one to help people through those battles and to really like get to as close as I can to understanding and relating, like getting inside, being in the spaces with them. Working at a suicide treatment center, I'm literally sitting with people who are suicidal every day, But anyway, my husband sharing that with me, I'm like, I'm just saying this because it's a very real thing, and none of us are immune. And every single one of us has either had thoughts of suicide or struggled with it personally, or we've known somebody who has, and we've definitely known people who have died by suicide. Like we have all been impacted by this, right? And so I guess I want to change the narrative like around that. Like it's not shameful. Like even suicide, like I don't blame people, but when people say the word suicide, I sense a discomfort even talking about it.
Yeah.
And it really does need to be part of normal conversation, just like when we talk about cancer. I talk about this in my book, but I say that those that battle suicidal ideation, it is no less monumental, like significant than those that battle cancer. So like those that battle cancer, we call them fighters. We call them strong. We call them warriors, right?
Yeah.
The battle against suicidal ideation is no less. These people are warriors. These people are strong. To fight through another day when you don't want to live, I mean, that is an ultimate, that takes an insurmountable amount of strength.
Yeah.
And in my view, that's a warrior to fight through every day, just like somebody battling cancer. So I compare it to that in my book, you know? And then what God has really revealed to me in losing my son, you know, that's a whole nother story, but he ended up going down the path of struggling with suicidal ideation that last year of his life. And so even though it wasn't suicide that took him, you know, overdose, he was going down the path of struggling with all those things. And then, you know, losing my student and my friend, what God really showed me was that even those we lose to these battles, the battle was never lost, because I wouldn't be sitting where I'm sitting, doing the work I'm doing, if I haven't walked the path I walked, if I hadn't faced these losses that I faced. It has fueled something in me to carry these people that I've lost, their love and light, to try and save other people's lives and actually be the vessel. It's not me, it's God, but be the vessel to save lives. And so even those we've lost, their light and love carries on in us to have conversations just like this. So your neighbor, like, I hope somebody's hearing this. I hope some man right now who's sitting there carrying this weight of suicide ideation, maybe fighting through another day. I hope they're hearing this and realizing how strong they are first and foremost. And then reach out, because there is absolutely help, and it is not shameful. I have seen into the suicidal mind. I can't imagine walking a day in those shoes.
Yeah. It's really well said. Have you ever seen the suicide prevention video from Norwich City? It's a professional soccer club that they did.
Oh, no.
Of the two men. You've never seen this?
No.
You're ready for your life to be changed.
Wow.
I'll let you watch it here.
Okay. Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and that was him, and that was so many of these other men that I've known. It's just,
you know, when you were saying that, I was thinking back to the student. Sadly, we had several suicides that would precede that in the following years. His suicide specifically really rocked the community, because that right there, nobody saw it coming. He was a football player. He was like tons of friends, super everybody loved him. He was like super charismatic, but he showed me the side of him that felt completely alone. And so I knew that, but on the outside, from what everybody could see, it didn't appear that way.
Yeah.
And so his peers were like truly shocked. Yeah. I'm so glad you're bringing that up. I think that's another thing, is like, more often than not, I hear of that. It's the people that like carry that are the biggest smile in the room. You know, the ones always laughing, the ones that look happy, the ones showing up.
Yeah. And at the end of that message, it says something to the effect of, you know, check in on your people. because you never know, right? And it's a big message that I try to share with the world is, check in on the people that you love with no strings attached. And, especially for men out there, it's like I think we struggle more than women do generally on this, and just like checking in on our guys and being like, hey man, how are you? Just thinking about you, and just listen. And you'll generally know, if you use your intuition that's been given to you by God, if something's up.
Yeah.
And you can press and lean in where it's necessary. And if I think if more men just felt like they had one other good man that they could call when they're really going through it, then I think we could slow this rate down quite a bit. So.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and that's why I say, first and foremost, they have to not feel the shame, because I think that's what prevents people from opening up.
Yeah.
They're
weak, or they're less than, or whatever.
Yeah. Because as a man, like I did a podcast on this with a gentleman, just really talking specifically to men and emotions, sharing emotions and the importance of it. Because I think for men, men have this responsibility that they're the providers of their home. They have to be strong. They have to hold the house down. I think men carry a lot of weight, in their lives and in their family, with their family. They carry the weight with that. It's on their shoulders. Yeah. And so 100%, like, it is so far from weak. I mean, to truly, for every man out there struggling with thoughts of suicide, to continue to stay, I mean, that alone, I know the kind of strength that takes. I've seen it.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, first of all, thank you for coming on and doing this. And I really enjoyed the conversation. I want you to speak to the audience. And so look into your camera here. And I want you to address those who are having suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation, and that are struggling with this directly.
Oh my gosh. First and foremost, I want you to know that the odds of you being born is 1 in 400 trillion. That means that you are not an accident. You are not insignificant. You are quite literally a living, breathing miracle. And I know life doesn't always feel miraculous. Life often feels like a relentless battlefield, filled with grief, pain, struggle, addiction, hardship. I mean, all the things. But you are truly a miracle. Your life has a purpose. It may not feel like it now. And if you are struggling, I want you to know how strong you are and how much courage it takes to reach out. But there are people out there who want to help. There are people out there who can help. And so please know that you are never alone in this battle. Reach out to me at _soul_soldier, at _soul_soldier on Instagram. I would be happy to connect you if you don't have anybody in your life that you feel like you can reach out to. But I truly, this is 100% preventable. But I think what prevents people from reaching out is that fear and that shame. And I hope that you drop those labels, because it actually takes an insurmountable amount of strength to fight through this and to reach out. Both those things take strength. So please reach out. Your life has a purpose, and you have a reason for being here, and you truly are a miracle.
Amen. Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.